sailor, what shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor early in the morning?
Okay, so we're back again, and I'm now installing the chines. The boat upside down. I've already done the other side. I'll show you how I fit up this side. Just the same thing, same process. You're going to take your chine log, which you want maybe a little bit more than a foot longer than what is actually needed for the length of the chine, and you'll see why in just a moment. And you're going to have a compound bevel at each end, or a compound angle, because you have the angle of the transom, and then you have the flare out from the side panels, both directions. So what I want to do is I'll start by taking my bevel gauge. I'm going to check my first bevel. I've already cut this one, as you can see. My next bevel, I'm going to check right here. I've already cut this one as well. What I do is I mark the two bevels on here and just make one cut. Make one cut on both at the same time. When I have those bevels, those angles cut, I'm going to fit it into place. And I'm going to see how it looks, and it's pretty darn close. So what I'll do is I'm going to stick a couple of clamps here, and what I'm doing is I'm going to bend the chine. It's a little bit tough, it's a little stiff, but you can do it. And fit it into the chine notch here by the main frame. And just push her down a little ways. It's not going to go in all the way. A couple more clamps. And now what I want to do, I just want to make sure that this is tight up against here. So I'm going to take my wooden mallet. Give her a little bop down the end. Make sure she's tight. Alrighty. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mark right here as a reference point, right about midships. I have it marked on the boat. I have it marked on the chine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out. Now that I have a mark here, I'm going to take it out, and now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find what the bevel is down the other end. I'm going to cut that compound bevel. I'm going to fit it into place, make a reference mark on the chine in the exact same place with respect to the hull where I made the mark here. And I'm going to have two marks that are spaced apart. That's how much extra chine material I have. I'm just going to come down that same distance and recut that bevel again, and then I'll have the exact length of chine that I need with the bevels cut, and it should fit perfectly just like the other side. So I'm going to now see what that bevel looks like. Okay. Get that one across. Okay, I now have the lines cut with the proper angles to fit the bevels where the side panel meets the stem. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this. I'm just going to use a handsaw. I'm using a miter handsaw because it has that reinforced back and the blade doesn't flex. I get a nice accurate cut. I usually use power saws. You could use a power saw on this if you want, if you're in a hurry. but you run the risk of getting a cut that's not quite that accurate. You might take a little too much off. If you do have a gap and you cut a little too much off, not all is lost. If you can thicken up some epoxy, add a little bit of filler to it, you can always fill those gaps. But if you want to have a nice tight fit with the wood and you don't want to see any gaps, you don't want to have to fill them in, then just take your time, use a hand tool, and it'll still make short work of it. It doesn't take very long. It's a very small piece of wood. And I'm going to cut this and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, I just finished making this compound angled cut for the bow, and now I can fit the chine in this direction, just like I did before with the rear. Going back to the stern, I'm going to take some clamps and I'm going to start making a bend. Just do it carefully, slowly, take your time. Okay. As you can see, I was able to make the bend. Not too much trouble. Now, if you do have a problem and you break it, this is a very cheap piece of wood. I just ripped these chines out of 2x4 KD building studs, and so they're very inexpensive. The sizes and cross section are going to depend on the boat design that you're building. These type of skiffs come in a variety of sizes, and of course the chines are going to be larger, smaller, whatever. So you just take the dimensions right from your plans. Now, once I get this in place, before I'm going to mark it, okay, I want to make sure that the chine the end of the chine is right up against the stem. So I'm going to just take my mallet, give it a little tap, a couple taps, check it out. Yep, she's right up there, a little even more than what I need. I'm going to make a mark here, just like I did before when I was fitting the other end. And now that I have that mark, I can take this out. You just have to hold it because this is going to spring on you. And if it does spring, you could tear the edge of your plywood, your side panel. So you want to hold it as you pull it up and you pop it out. There you go. Okay, now I have the two marks. Here's my mark here. Here's my mark there. I'm just going to grab a tape measure. I'd say about 14 inches and a 32nd. So all I have to do now is come down here and I can measure that same distance, 14 inches and a 32nd, make a mark, take my bevel gauge, set it at the angle that's there that I already fit, bring it down to this mark, mark that, take the other angle, mark that, so I have my compound angle. Not as much angle here at the stern, so it's a little bit easier to cut, not as radical. So we're going to fit this. I'm going to cut it just a little bit outside the line, and I can sneak up on it if necessary to make sure I have a good tight fit. So I'll cut this off camera. And I made the cut, the compound cut that I had to do, compound angle cut I should say. And now I'm going to see if this fits, if I have to make any more adjustments. So again, I'm going to start at the bow, and I'm placing because the angles flare out on each end, it won't just drop straight in. In order to get it to fit, I'm going to have to play with it a little bit. So when I first put it in, where the chine goes meets the stem, I'm dropping it down maybe about an inch or so initially, and then that'll be brought back up as I go along. I'll get a couple more clamps standing by. And this isn't something you want to rush. Like most things in boat building, you want to take your time. Don't try to rush it. Don't worry, you'll get there. And again, if you get to this point and you find out the chine breaks on you, don't sweat it. It's just a little piece of wood. It's inexpensive. You can always make another one. Okay, so now that's within there. Move this a little bit. Now I'm going to tap it up. So I try to work her back. Okay, I have the chine in place. I have it to the point where the marks I made are lined up, but the front part of the chine, the forward part where it meets the stem, I can't bring it up flush with the bottom of the stem. It's down a little ways, which means that I cut the chine just a little bit too long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the chine. I'm going to take a smidgen off, maybe maybe a 1/16 of an inch, and I'm just going to do that with a sander. I'm going to sand off a little edge, and I'm going to try fitting it again and see how it works. Okay, this time after just sanding off a little bit off one end of the chine, I put it back in, and it's now fitting in perfectly, exactly where I want. It's nice and tight at both ends. There are no gaps, and so now I'm ready to go ahead and I'm going to pre-drill. What I do is maybe every 2 to 3 inches, I drill through the side panel into the chine and go ahead and countersink. And then what I do is go ahead and put the screw in. And I'm going to do that all the way down so she's all screwed in place. When that's done, just like I did with the rest of the assembly previously when I was putting the boat together, I'm going to take all the screws out. I'm going to take the chine out once again, and I'm going to clean up any wood chips from the drilling and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and apply the epoxy resin and using it as a glue, and I'll put the chine back in place. Only this time I will still use clamps, but the screws will help align the chine in place as it sits right now, so it'll go in perfectly just the way I want it. And then it's just a matter of letting the epoxy set up. Okay, I took the chine out again. I cleaned everything up. I went ahead and applied my adhesive, the epoxy resin, put the chine back in, ran the screws back in, and then I went around with a rag and I cleaned up all the excess glue that squeezed out. This is really something you ought to do if you're building anything, because if you just let the glue ease out, it doesn't matter whether it's wood glue or epoxy or urethane, construction adhesive, whatever you're using, if you just let it ooze out and let it cure, you have all kinds of scraping and grinding and sanding. It's just a whole lot of extra work. So take the time to wipe it off, check back in a few minutes, see if anything more oozes out, clean it again, and let it cure. And there'll be a whole lot less work involved if you do that. So at this point, both chines are installed, chine logs. This is our main frame, a transom. Notice that I cut off the protruding part of the stem. And the next step now is to do a little bit of planing, a little bit of sanding. The idea is to make a flat surface all the way around, and I'll be checking it with a straight edge. And that's going to be the next segment that I film. And the reason I want everything nice and flat is because that's going to be the sealing surface for the bottom panel, which we'll be fitting up next.
What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor?